This is going to be a very interesting video. The United Kingdom is a very large and diverse area of massive land. In that massive land, there's a lot of football teams, and there's a lot of football teams separated into separate areas. We have Birmingham, Manchester, Lancashire, South Coast, North East, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Wales, East Anglia. There's a lot of places which a lot of fans like to say they represent that one area. London is white, red, blue. Manchester's blue or red. Liverpool's blue or red. So I've gone out my way to research every single football team which has got a single debate to be in that representation of that area. This is a long video that took me a long time to research these actual teams. So if you do enjoy, then make sure to smash the like button. Subscribe if you're new. And yeah, actually please subscribe because I may get a few comments about this one, not gonna lie. So in context, I'm a Burnley fan. I have no preferences towards any other team other than Burnley. So I'm thinking where the Lancashire argument is going to come from. But feel free and play along, then comment down below, what is which area. Those 18 areas is Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, London, South Coast, East Anglia, South West, Wales, North East, South East, Bristol, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Sheffield, Lancashire, Yorkshire, East Midlands, and a Black Country. And I've separated each club on which one do I think is the biggest and represents that area based on 4, maybe even 5 things. And that is, number 1 is the honours in England. So how many FA Cups, how many First Divisions, how many League Cups have they actually acquired? Number 2 is in fact the actual derby or the actual rivalry between the 2 teams or 3 teams in question. What's the record? So who's beat the other team the most? It's about 5 wins, 2 wins, 10 wins, maybe even 30 wins. Number 3 is European. So how many European Cups or UEFA Cups or UEFA Cups Champions Cups? That's another thing as well from back in the day. And also, how dominant were they in Europe? How often were they in Europe? What teams did they face and what teams did they play against? What team did they beat? So like Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, Bayern Munich, these are the teams which are always like at the top tier. Have they beat them once or twice? Number 4, I've got to keep it into consideration in recent years. So how dominant are they in their area in the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years? So not the last 5 years. So I'm not using recency bias as this or just history. I'm using a accumulation of both as a tide turned in terms of that area. Who's the biggest club? Because it's all well and good winning like all your first division trophies in 1890 and 1900s. If you've won nothing since then can I really count you as still repping that area if you've done nothing in about 100 years? So hopefully you guys do understand the thought process, and I'm gonna try and go through this as fast and as simple as possible, if that's possible. So with that said, let's go. Birmingham. Of course, there's only 2 teams in Birmingham that can be put a good shout for this, and of course that's Aston Villa and Birmingham City. Now Aston Villa has got 7 First Divisions, 7 FA Cups, 5 League Cups, and 1 Champions League. They've also beat the Blues 19 times more in their entire history, and have been above Birmingham City in league finishes in every single season in the last 40 years other than 1 season. That's a very, very big stat. I think only 1 season, or maybe even 2 seasons, Birmingham City in the last 40 years has actually finished above them. But when it comes to the Blues, Birmingham City, their highest ever league trophy is Division 2. They've won no FA Cups, but they've won 2 League Cups. So that's something. So Birmingham is quite obviously my easiest area. I mean, a Champions League is not just enough, but the First Division trophies, and of course, they've beaten them 19 more times in history. It's easy to say that Birmingham is claret and blue. The North East. Again, just like most areas, only 2 teams can actually be given a shout for representing the North East, and this is very, very close, and this is quite tight. And if you look into it, there's a lot behind this than you actually think. The North East is, of course, shared by Sunderland and Newcastle United. Now, in their both head-to-head history between Newcastle and Sunderland, they actually drawing on wins. So both are sharing the wins in the Tyne-Wear derby. Fun fact that you need to know, Sunderland is in fact the only team, unlike Newcastle, to have actually dropped into the 3rd division of football. The more you know. But Sunderland is actually quite a very well-honoured team. They've actually won 6 First Division trophies in the 1890s, and latest win was in 1936. They've won 2 FA Cups, and in Europe, their only thing which I can gather is that they made it to the 2nd round of the European Cup, but got knocked out by Sporting Lisbon. Now, let's compare that to Newcastle. Newcastle has got 4 First Division trophies, 6 FA Cups. They've beat Barcelona, they've beat Juventus, they've beat Inter Milan, and was in Europe for many years in the 90s and 2000s. If you actually look back, they had many appearances in the UEFA Cup and even the Champions League. So it's really tough tough to pick Sunderland and Newcastle because Sunderland has got more trophies in terms of first divisions, 2 more of them. However, in Europe, they've got no real pedigree because most of their success was very early on in their history. But in recent years, of course, they've been down below. But of course, they were in Premier League for a long period of time. So Sunderland has got the most trophies in England. However, Newcastle has by far done better in Europe than Sunderland. And also, a large portion of their history has been in the top flight and second division. Newcastle United has spent more time of their entire history in the top division than Sunderland. If you look at both these graphs here, you can see that Sunderland has definitely been dipped more into the second division and also third division more times than Newcastle in their entire history. So if I'm comparing Europe and the better side in recent years, in theory of actually doing something compared to trophies in the very early days of football, I'm going to say Newcastle here, boys. It's very close and both are good teams and both are proper teams. But I'm going to say North East is black and white. The South Coast. Is the South Coast blue and yellow or red and white? So, the South Coast only represents really Southampton and Portsmouth. So let's talk to you about Southampton. So Southampton, their major honour is the FA Cup. Only one FA Cup. They've never won the first division. In a derby between Portsmouth and Southampton, Portsmouth has actually won them more times head-to-head. But one thing to keep in mind about Southampton is that actually since 1977, over the 7 years of that entire period till today, they've been in top flight. So 7 years out of that, they was out of top flight. Rest of the years, since 1977, they've been up there. So they've always been in the top flight football in recent years. So what about Portsmouth? Well, Portsmouth are in fact 2 first division champions and of course 2 FA Cup champions. So in terms of major honours, they definitely are beating Southampton in that. In Europe, Portsmouth are well known for almost beating AC Milan at Fratton Park back in 2008. Southampton has been in Europe many times, even in last recent years, beating Inter at St Mary's 2-1. Back in the 80s, they were in Europe quite often in the UEFA Cup and also in the European Cup Winners' Cup, so otherwise known as the Europa League as what it is nowadays. And the furthest they went was the quarterfinals against Anglia and got knocked out. So again, this one is tough because Portsmouth has got more honours in terms of England, but in terms of Europe, Southampton's definitely been the more prominent. And if we want to compare the recent years, well, Southampton has been in top flight a lot more often in the last, 50, 60, 70 odd years than Portsmouth. Since the 1950s, Portsmouth has been in top flight for about shy of 10 years. But for Southampton, they've been in top flight, for about 30 odd years, 40 years in that, since 1950. So it's tough to say because major honours is major honours. And in fact, Portsmouth won their recent one in 2008 in the FA Cup when they beat Cardiff. So it kind of depends on which side you want to go on it, if it's based on just major honours or if it's based on Europe and recent years and how often are you in the first division compared to the other team. But the one thing that's put the nail in the coffin here is that Portsmouth has been in the 4th division of football twice. Not just recently, but also back in like the 90s. So for that reason, Southampton's never been in the 4th division. So I'm going to say Southampton. The South Coast is red and white. Manchester. Is Manchester red or blue? So this is a very, very popular one. And for me, this is the most simplest. Like, even more simpler than Birmingham. Manchester United or Manchester City? Manchester United, 20 Premier Leagues, first divisions, 12 FA Cups, 3 Champions Leagues, also beating Manchester City 21 more times head-to-head in their entire history. While City has also won 6 Premier Leagues and 6 FA Cups and also 1 UEFA Cup trophy, City are the only team to go into the 3rd tier of English football. United has never dropped down that low. In Europe, of course, United is better. In terms of honours, United is better. And recent years, of course, since last 10 years, City has probably been above them. But it's only really been in the last 10 years that they've been above them. And I can't compare 10 years of, last 10 years to an entire history of football. I'm sorry, City fans, but it's Manchester's red. You can't erase over 100 years of history and Premier League title wins and dominant years in the last recent years, in 2000s and that. So City, if you keep this up for like another 20 odd years, then maybe I'll say Manchester's blue. But right now, it is 100% red. Sheffield. Is Sheffield red and white or blue and white? So of course, this is comparing Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. Both 2 great teams, both 2 old-fashioned teams, and I think they're 2 proper clubs, so I respect them both. But let's start digging into a bit of their history. Sheffield United is actually ahead by 4 wins. They've beat Wednesday. Sheffield United has got 1 first division trophy in 1898. They've got 4 FA Cups, and Sheffield United is in fact the only team out of the 2 to play in Division 4. And from what I can gather, Sheffield United has got no history in Europe as well. So sadly, I can't use Europe as a point for Sheffield United. Now let's talk about Sheffield Wednesday. 4 First Division trophies, 3 FA Cups, 1 League Cup, and have beat Barcelona and Roma in the European Cups. Weirdly enough, if you look at the graphs in terms of where they've been in football, like in the history, they've both had very similar rises and downs. In terms of who's been in top division most often, I would say it's actually Sheffield United in their early years. However, in the last like 30 odd years, Wednesday that's been in there more often than not. I'm going to say that Sheffield is blue and white. More major honours in England, more European pedigree, and in recent years, they've been quite similar. United's doing the best of the team right now, but how long would that last? Well, if they make it to Europe this year, you never know. As of right now, I'm going to say Sheffield is blue and white. Liverpool, of course, between Liverpool and Everton, who represent the area. And again, just like Manchester, it's kind of unfair to compare them to. Everton is a proper club, and by no means should they be disrespected. Got 9 First Divisions, they've got 5 FA Cups and 1 UEFA Cup. Compare them to most teams in most areas, which we're going to talk about, they will be up there, you know, pretty much repping the entire area. But it's a shame that their neighbours, Liverpool, is just a bit bigger. Liverpool 18 First Division, 7 FA Cups, 8 League Cups, 6 Champions Leagues, and have in fact in a head-to-head beat Everton 29 more times in their history. That's big, that's massive. So I'm not going to waste too much time on this. Between Liverpool and Everton, Everton are a big club and they will be repping more series in the country, but in terms of Liverpool, is sadly non-comparable. So for Liverpool, it's most definitely red. East Anglia. East Anglia got 2 main teams, Norwich City and Ipswich Town. So at first thought, most people I saw on Twitter say that it is in fact yellow and green, which I kind of thought that way in the last couple of years because Ipswich has been quite, you know, a mediocre championship club until they went down last year and they are now League One. But then I in fact looked into the history of both teams. So head to head between Ipswich and Norwich, Ipswich has in fact won the most games in a derby, and they've also won the First Division, and they've also beat Barcelona, Real Madrid, AC Milan, Inter Milan, and in fact have won a European Cup and a FA Cup. Granted, that European Cup was the UEFA Cup and not the actual European Cup. It's still a European trophy. That's some pretty good European pedigree, beating Barcelona and Real Madrid and AC Milan and Inter Milan. That is definitely not easy to do. But comparing that to Norwich, when Norwich, their only honours in England is 2 League Cups. They've actually never won the First Division ever in their history. So in recent years, you may say that Norwich has beat them more in the derby, but in terms of the entire history of the entire clubs, Ipswich definitely is the better team. You could say that in recent years it's been Norwich, and you have a good point for that. Actually, of course, since 2000s, Norwich has typically been above Ipswich. But if you're comparing head-to-head and also major honours and also European pedigree, I've got to say it's Ipswich. So I would say East Anglia is blue and white. Wales. Is Wales blue or white? So only 2 teams really has a shout of being, you know, represented Wales, and that is in fact Cardiff and Swansea City. There's of course teams like Newport County, but I don't think they can be put into consideration. But I'll put your name in because I like you guys. I like your colours. Cardiff has won 1 FA Cup in history, and the highest trophy they've won in the league is the 2nd Division trophy. Head to head, Cardiff has won the most in a Southwest derby. It was in fact runners-up in Division 1 at one stage. They almost won Division 1, when in fact the closest Swansea came was in fact 6th place in the First Division in their history. And also Cardiff in Europe has in fact beat Real Madrid in 1970. So they do have a bit of European pedigree. Now let's compare them to Swansea City. The biggest league trophy Swansea's ever won is the 3rd Division, but they've won that 3 times in fact in their history. They've won 1 League Cup in recent years, and they in fact ran to the round of 32 in the Europa League very recently, but got knocked out by Napoli. So Swansea has definitely been in Europe much more recently. And as well, keep in mind that Swansea has probably been in the Premier League more often than not in also recent years. Comparing both teams in terms of history of where they've been in the league, Swansea and Cardiff has both been in Division 4. But I'll say that Swansea has been in Division 4 more often than Cardiff. Keep in mind that even in the early 2000s, they was in League 1 and League 2. And keep in mind that before 2010, Swansea has not been in the Premier League at all for the entire history, other than about 2, 3 seasons in the early 1980s. So comparing that to Cardiff, they have spent maybe more time in the top flights, but they were very early on in their history. And you could say in recent years that Swansea has been the main team in Wales in the Premier League as well. So again, it is tough on Cardiff with more major honours, when in fact you could say they've got more European pedigree, beating Real Madrid in 1970, but Swansea's been in there more recently and they've made it to the round of 32. In the last 20 years, it has been Swansea. You're flying the flag for Wales, but Cardiff has won the most head-to-head. This one's tough, so you can go your own way on this one, on which side you think it is. If I'm gonna think that, you know, since I've been growing up, which team is, you know, the Welsh team, which team reps Wales, I'm gonna say that Wales is I'm gonna annoy someone here by saying this. I'm gonna annoy someone. I'm gonna say that Wales is white. And that's just based on recent history. Cardiff has definitely got some pedigree, but in terms of European glory in the last couple of years as well, they've been up there. So unless if Cardiff goes back up to the Premier League and they stay there for a few more years, I'll say it's them. But as of right now, I'm gonna have to say Swansea.